A brand new update has been released for Build 42, and there's almost certainly going to be a feature or two that you weren't expecting in this one. It's a big list of patch notes, much of it is balancing changes or fixes that are pretty minor, but there's also a couple of big ticket items, and in this video I'll make sure to cover all of the highlights that you need to know about directly from those patch notes. This update is 42.8.0, released on May 5th of 2025, and there will be a link to the full patch notes down in the description. Like and subscribe for more Project Zomboid news, gameplay, mod recommendations, or guides. Let's start with the new additions from this patch. So I want to kick things off with what I think will be the biggest implementation of this update. I mean, everyone is going to be talking about this. Project Zomboid has added its first iteration of ragdoll physics to zombies. Right now, this only applies to zombies that are taken down with firearms or vehicles. The developers have noted they want to bring this to melee weapon kills in the future, but that this isn't imminent. Personally, after taking out a few zombies with a shotgun and driving through a few hordes, I'm absolutely in love with this feature. It is just brilliant. If, however, for any reason it is not for you, you'll be glad to know that you can turn this off in the options at any time. Several new biome improvements have been made in this update, the most prominent likely being the addition of sandbanks and clay when close to water. This should make the pottery and glass making skills much easier to engage with and craft with. Sand especially should be a bit more common, as those tiles will now be generated in all forest biomes. There are now extra generator options in these sandbox settings targeted specifically at making it easier to live in tall or deep structures. The default values are for a generator to have a 20 tile radius and 3 levels of vertical range, but this can now be customized to your liking. This crucially means that locations like the March Ridge bunker are now viable safe house options with the right sandbox settings. While we're speaking about subterranean complexes, 3 new basement types have been added to the game. No mention in the patch notes on what these are specifically, but they are out there, so keep an eye out when you're looting next. Another new sandbox setting implementation, there has been the addition of options for endless or disabled time and weather conditions. For example, you could select an endless day or night cycle, an endless blizzard, or disable fog or rain entirely. This could make for some interesting challenge runs in the future, or add to existing modded setups like the popular cryogenic winter run. Improvements have been made to the hot save system, including saving of the player map, animal zones, and game time. Essentially, this means that should you experience an unexpected game crash, you shouldn't lose any progress or knowledge when you boot things back up. There have been a number of new additions for animals in this update, including better detection for animals drinking from puddles when the player isn't around, and the new animal sinew item, which drops when butchering depending on the animal's size and can be used to make thread in the crafting menu. You can now also make milk for baby animals using powder that you can loot in the world. This means that should the mother of an animal die unexpectedly, or you find an animal that can't locate its mother, they still have a fighting chance at survival and can be hand-reared by the player now. This powdered milk can be mixed with either a bucket full of water or a feeding bottle full of water, which is then fed to the animal. Wild animal hunting has also seen some new implementations. When you shoot an animal now, it won't just drop dead immediately unless you're at high aiming skill. It will now flee the scene, leaving a blood trail behind for the player to follow, ultimately leading you to the carcass that can be hauled back to your base or butchered in the wild. The developers note here that some animals will flee for longer, such as deer fleeing longer than rabbits, for example, on account of them being larger and thus taking longer for them to bleed out. As I mentioned earlier, aiming skill also factors into this equation, with higher aiming skill resulting in a quicker kill to simulate the shot being closer to the heart. And last of the new implementations when it comes to animals, they will now become domesticated when they are picked up, not when you drop them into an animal zone. This was done to avoid players being able to make a quick zone just to capture wild animals like rats and mice, making it much easier to collect them for food. A pretty generic animation has now been added to the process process of mixing liquids, and there is now a progress indicator when adding fuel to a generator. There is now a button to add areas from annotated maps to the character's existing map knowledge, just like you can with flyers. This does not transfer any of the annotations from the item, but does reveal the location on your map. More flyers have also been added to the game yet again, which I believe makes this the third or fourth update in a row that flyers have actually been brought in. Now this next one is a really nice quality of life addition. When completing actions like lighting a cigarette, eating part of a food item, or taking pills, the item will now be returned to the original container it was pulled from. This does not work if the character has the disorganized trait, and on a very similar token, if the character has a spoon, fork, or spork in any container on their person, they will now use this utensil when eating. This changes the animation, eating speed, and sometimes the stat benefits of eating an item, so it's worth carrying one around now if you can. There have been a couple of small additions to vehicles now, which should make towing a trailer on grass tiles much easier than it was previously. The center of mass has also been changed for animal trailers, which means that they should tip over less often, unless of course you're treating your vehicle like Colin McRae would a rally car. Various new crafting recipes have been added or changed. As always, there's a whole bunch of these to go through, to be honest, so I'm putting many of them on screen now, and if you'd like, you can pause the video here to take a moment to go through them. Notable highlights, however, include blacksmithing recipes for a carpentry chisel, a wrench, the smelting of steel, and various crafted hurricane lanterns. There is also now a tailor profession available when creating your character. Alright, so we're into the balancing department now. Our first change is something that I think a lot of players had installed mods for back in build 41. Now, when it snows, rain collectors will fill up just like when it's raining. It will be a slower fill rate, but it's really nice to see this adapted because, after all, it does make a lot of sense. On the flip side, gasoline will now evaporate at a much slower rate than it was previously. This should allow us to store fuel in open containers, at least for a short duration. Characters can now complete actions while opening doors, climbing through windows or over fences, or drawing curtains. There have been some new adjustments to fishing mechanics, such as rebalanced fish sizes, heavier penalties for improper completion of fishing, and limitations to casting range of fishing rods. In the farming department, growth times for flax, rye, and wheat have all been reduced. This should help with the crafted clothing recipes and creating flour using crafting stations. Tool damage has been reduced for several crafts that would be considered to be lighter work. This includes things like baking, cooking, or various electrical recipes. Recipes for dismantling tools and weapons will now accept broken items, making it easier to reclaim parts, especially from modded items that might not automatically separate into a head and handle like the vanilla items do currently. Some updates to traits and character creation next. The occupations carpenter, DIY expert, and engineer will all now apply one level of masonry. This also goes for the handy trait selection. The chef occupation, as well as both the hunter and keen cook trait, will now add one level of butchering also. The devs note that it's intentional that the burger flipper occupation does not provide this benefit to butchering. Several crafting recipes have seen some adjustments, which, judging by the patch notes, are aimed at making the early stages of wilderness or low loot situations a little bit easier. The biggest that I've noticed amongst all of them is that burlap can now be woven from dogbane, which is found through foraging. So you won't need to wait for your crops to grow in order to make basic clothing now, you can just forage the raw materials instead, at least to make the very crude starting clothes for a wilderness setup. One very questionable change I also found was the removal of napping large stones into regular stones. This was a level 0 craft, making it pretty crucial for leveling the napping skill. The reason cited by the developers is that this recipe is redundant on account of a masonry recipe that performs the same task, but napping only really has a couple of alternatives if you're level 0 when it comes to leveling, that being napping flint flakes from flint nodules you gather from the world, which requires either a club or stone hammer, or napping limestone, which has, well, also been removed in this update. I'm not really sure how I feel about this one. I realize why it needed to happen to condense crafts down, but it was also undeniably the easiest way to level the napping skill. Interested to hear your thoughts on this one if you spent some time with the napping skill so far. Last of the balancing changes in the crafting department that I wanted to highlight before we move on, XP gains from adding and removing patches from clothing has been reduced. The developers say that this was previously increased to help players level up tailoring, but based on feedback from players, using patching almost exclusively to level the tailoring skill is an undesirable approach. Now, our next section is particularly interesting for me because we've got a segment of these patch notes dedicated to UI changes, with a couple of them being in the crafting menu specifically. For those that don't know, recently I did a separate video where we covered some of the fundamental problems with the crafting menu and even produced a concept design with the help of PZ modder Rocco. And I think some of these changes are a good sign that the developers are definitely willing to receive and, more importantly, listen to feedback like this. The biggest of these UI changes is that we can now sort recipes by recipe names, last used, and most used, which should make it quite a bit easier to find the recipes that you're making on repeat to level crafting skills, or just ones you're using often. What I find particularly interesting though is that the developers don't seem to have mentioned that this only works on the building menu right now. I'm not sure why that's the case because the patch notes seem to refer to both menus. I can only imagine this is a bug, and hopefully it gets added to the crafting menu as well soon. Filtering back to those wooden wall frames or wooden floors you keep placing is much easier now though. So a couple of very positive changes for the crafting menu UI, and I hope we see some more in the future because I definitely feel like it needs a bit of love and attention right now to make it less intimidating to use for the average player. And that brings us nicely to the fixes in this update, and while I'd love to cover them all, you can see by this very extensive list that this just won't be possible in this video. Instead, I've got the highlights for you here. Zombies freezing when killed as they are vaulting through windows or over fences has now been fixed, with only a few edge cases left to be addressed, specifically when zombies are killed with firearms. The M16 no longer has the fire rate of an A10 Warthog and will now operate as intended when firing on full auto. Some issues causing the character to aim downward before a zombie has actually fallen over have also been fixed. Also on the firearms front in this update, a fix has been administered to cases where the character would sometimes stop shooting crawling or downed zombies. An issue has now been fixed that caused plumbed sinks to provide tainted water when the water source contained a mix of both fresh and tainted. It will now produce clean water as intended. Your character will no longer get stressed from cutting down trees, which I guess is a nice thing, and I also had no idea that this was a bug, so I'm glad that it's gone all the same. The large flat stones can now be picked up, and they will no longer vanish to the nether every time you pull them off the ground. This should make leveling certain skills a little bit easier. You will now be able to wash rags with seltzer or mixed water, which was already intended but wasn't functioning correctly until now. Highlighting hundreds of nails will no longer absolutely destroy your frame rate, which is always nice to see, especially if you're getting involved with a lot of carpentry recipes and building. So like I said, a whole bunch more fixes in this section, but those are the ones I feel you absolutely need to know, and the rest are very minor in comparison. That brings us to the end of these patch notes, and as such, that is it from me in this one. Just a heads up that I've recently moved into a new place, and the move has been very hectic. I actually got this video together quite literally a day or two before the move, but anyway, all to say that there may be a delay with my video uploads coming up, as we're expecting to be without internet for a short while, and I'll be back in action around June 3rd. We've got some stuff already scheduled for upload on my second channel, MrAtomicDuck VODs, so if you're hankering for new stuff, you can find it there. Special thank you, as always, once again to my Patreon supporters for backing the channel for as little as £3 a month, and for joining our whitelisted Project Zomboid multiplayer server, where we change the theme and host community events every single month. Your support means the world to me, and there is a link down in the description if you want to join them. Thanks everyone, and I will see you all in the next one.